This is part 30 of Azure tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss how to use Swagger in ASP.NET Core Web API and automatically generate API documentation. In our upcoming videos, we'll discuss how to deploy this web API in Azure. Now, take a look at this solution, Employee Management. We've got two projects within this solution, Employee Management.api and Employee Management.models. And if we take a look at this API project, we've got two controllers, departments and employees. If we take a look at this employees controller, we've got all the CRUD operations, that is create, read, update, and delete, including search. This is a RESTful service that we have built from scratch in our Blazor course. So, if you're new to building RESTful services using ASP.NET Core, I strongly recommend to check out our Blazor tutorial for beginners course. In this course, we've covered building this employee management API from scratch. So, in part 10 of this video series, we discussed what are RESTful APIs and covered all the CRUD operations, including search, in part 20. So, if you want to follow along and build this employee management API from scratch, then please watch videos from part 10 to part 20. When we navigate to this endpoint, API/employees, we see the list of all employees, and we get this list from a SQL Server database. And if we want a specific employee, we pass the ID of the employee in the URL. Similarly, if we want the list of all departments, we go to this endpoint, API/departments. Again, if you want a specific department, simply pass the ID of the department in the URL. At the moment, this API does not have any documentation whatsoever. So if we navigate to this endpoint /swagger, we get a 404. Now, let's say we don't want to share our API code, but we want the other developers to be able to consume and use our API in the apps that they are building. But then without documentation, for them to be able to consume our API, they will have several questions like what endpoints are available at your API and what operations are supported at each of those endpoints, get, put, post, delete, search, etc. What parameters should I pass and what will I get back? We will have to answer several questions like this over and over again. It's boring and not efficient. On the other hand, if we have Swagger documentation for our API, we simply ask the developers to navigate to our server URL /swagger, and then they will have answers for all their questions. They can even point some automated tools at our Swagger API documentation and then generate the client libraries automatically. They don't even have to write the code manually themselves. Just imagine how efficient it can be both for us as well as the other developers who are consuming our API in the apps that they are building. Now, we discussed OpenAPI specification, Swagger, Swashbuckle, and the relationship between them in detail in our previous video. So let's quickly recap. OpenAPI is a specification, that is, it's a set of rules that specifies how to describe an API. Swagger is a set of open source tools built around the OpenAPI specification. Swashbuckle is a NuGet package and it contains Swagger tools for documenting APIs that are built on Microsoft.NET platform. Now, if we want Swagger documentation to be generated for our employee management API, all we need to do is install this NuGet package, swashbuckle.aspnet core, and configure it. In Visual Studio, in the Solution Explorer, right-click on your API project and then select this option, Manage NuGet Packages. Make sure you're on the Browse tab and search for swashbuckle.aspnet core. Here is that package. Let's select it and take a look at this dependencies. It has dependency on several other packages. These dependencies will also be automatically installed. So click the install button. There we go. Installation complete. This main package, swashbuckle.aspnet core, has a dependency on the following three NuGet packages, SwaggerGen, Swagger, and Swagger UI. The first package, SwaggerGen, inspects our API code, that is, our API routes, controllers, and models, and then builds the Swagger document objects automatically. The second package, Swagger, exposes Swagger document objects as JSON endpoints. And the final package, that is Swagger UI, interprets Swagger document objects and generates interactive documentation for our API, and also lets our users test the API calls directly in the browser. Our next step is to configure Swagger, and we do that in startup.cs file of our API project. In configure services method on this incoming parameter iServiceCollection, call add SwaggerGen method. Notice the name of the method, SwaggerGen. It stands for Swagger Generator. As the name implies, this method adds Swagger Generator to the services collection. Next, in the configure method, we need to add Swagger middleware to the HTTP processing pipeline. So on this incoming parameter, iApplicationBuilder, we call use Swagger. This middleware serves the generated Swagger document as a JSON endpoint. We'll see that in action in just a bit. We need to add another piece of middleware, and that is Swagger UI. This piece of middleware looks at this endpoint /swagger/v1/swagger.json. Remember, it is this JSON document that contains the OpenAPI specification document for this employee management API. So the Swagger UI looks at this JSON document and automatically generates the documentation for our employee management API. So to configure Swagger in an ASP.NET Core Web API project, all we need is these 3 lines of code. Add SwaggerGen. This adds Swagger Generator to the services collection, and then these 2 pieces of middleware. With these 3 lines of code, let's run our API project. There we go. We have our API up and running. Now, if we navigate to this URL /swagger/v1/swagger.json, we see the OpenAPI specification document for our employee management API. And remember, it is this document that drives the documentation for our API. And to see the documentation in action, just navigate to this URL /swagger. There we go. As you can see, this employee management API supports 2 endpoints, departments and employees. This endpoint, departments, supports 2 get operations, and this endpoint, employees, supports get, post, put, and delete. We also have search here as a get operation. And if we scroll down a bit, we have the schema for all the objects, department, employee, and gender. And if we take a look at the department object, it has 2 properties, department ID and department name, along with their data types. And we can also try out these API calls right from within the browser. For example, let's try this endpoint, get employee by ID. And to try it, click this button, try it out. And notice ID is a required parameter. To be able to get employee by ID, we need to specify the ID of the employee and then click the execute button. We have the request URL right here. Notice the ID of the employee is passed in the URL and we have the response. Now, remember, when we navigate to this URL /swagger/v1/swagger.json, we see the OpenAPI specification document for our employee management API. This generated Swagger JSON document can be customized. This means even the API documentation can be customized because the API documentation is driven by this generated Swagger JSON document. For example, in configure services method, let me replace this line with another piece of code. We're still calling add SwaggerGen, which obviously adds Swagger Generator to the services collection. In addition, we're also calling Swagger doc method. And this method is used to add version, title, description, terms of service, contact person, and license terms to the generated Swagger document. And to fix these compilation errors, we need to bring in a namespace. And the namespace that we need is microsoft.openapi.models. Notice now in the generated OpenAPI specification document, we have title, description, terms of service, etc. And if we navigate to the Swagger documentation, we see the same right here. So the point that I'm trying to make is, along with the Swagger doc method that we have just seen, we can also use XML comments and data annotations to control the generated Swagger JSON document and the API documentation. Now, how to use XML comments and data annotations for customization? Well, that is beyond the scope of this video. Maybe we'll cover them in the future in a separate course. In our next video, we'll discuss how to deploy this employee management API in Azure. That's it in this video. Thank you for listening.